I tried to do this with my cat on the porch, and it went horribly wrong. So he has been banished. Hello, world history students. This is Mr. Everton, coming to you from beautiful Casa de Everton, nestled in the heart of Crozet, Virginia. And today we're going to learn about trade routes. Your aim question is, how did merchants connect Afro-Eurasia? Now, merchants are people who buy and sell things. Typically, if you buy something where there's a lot of it and the price is kind of low, right? There's a lot of something, the price is low. So if you go to where there's a lot of it, you buy it where it's cheap, and then you take it somewhere else where it's more rare, the price goes up, you make a profit. So that's the whole idea that the merchants have. Afro-Eurasia, I know sometimes students laugh when I say that because they think that I'm giving Eurasia and Afro. I think it sounds funny. Afro-Eurasia just means the landmass that is Africa, Europe, and Asia. When you think about it, it's really just one big continent. So merchants connected Afro-Eurasia, one way, was through the Silk Road trade. Silk roads, there were many of them, right? So don't imagine 29. It's not one road. It's many different roads. And merchants didn't travel the entire length of the Silk Road either. What they would do is somebody in China would buy some silk, and they would head west with it, and then they would stop at a city somewhere in the middle and do a deal and then go back. And that merchant who bought the silk from them, the new merchant, would then head further west and then sell the silk to somebody else. And every time it gets sold, the price goes up, right? And so eventually it makes its way to Europe. And people in Europe really liked silk, and they really wanted to get it. And the only way to get it was to get it from China. And so it was a luxury good that was traded over land. And most of the goods that traveled along the Silk Road were luxury goods because they had to be small enough to fit on a horse or a camel. Make sure that you're writing down more than just Silk Roads, right? Like, you don't have to write down everything I just said, but you need to at least write down that it connected China to Europe or China to Constantinople. And if you write down something like usually they traded luxury goods, that would be good too. Another example of a trade route that we've already talked about. We've talked about all three of these trade routes before, but we're talking about them again in their own video because they're important, is the Trans-Saharan trade network, which crossed the Sahara Desert. That's why it's called that. Trans means across the Sahara Desert. And that connected the Islamic world in North Africa and the Middle East with sub-Saharan West Africa. Sub-Saharan means below the Sahara Desert. And we talked about how that's really important for the Songhai Empire because they controlled the trade of gold and salt, which was really important and made them a lot of money. And then we've also talked about the Swahili Coast. Well, the Swahili Coast was part of the Indian Ocean Trade Network. And that was just like trade all around the Indian Ocean. And I've labeled all the places that took part in this trade. We've got the African cities on the Swahili Coast. We've got the Ottoman Empire. And then India is so important because it's right in the center. So a lot of people from Africa go to India and trade and then go home. And then a lot of people from China go to India and trade and then go home. So India is sort of like where all the good deals happen. Okay, so those are the three trade routes. How did technology benefit these trade routes? Well, technology made trade possible. Like, if you're going to cross the Sahara Desert, you need to have a camel that you can ride on, and you need to have a camel saddle, right? And somebody had to invent that. If you're going to be going down the Silk Roads, you need to have a place to stop. And the places that people started making for people to stop and like spend the night and like get fed and like feed their animals were called caravanserai. It's basically just like old historical hotel in Central Asia where people would stop along the Silk Road in order to like rest, take a break. They can't just like go forever. On the Indian Ocean Trade Network, it was really helpful to have this device invented by China called the stern post rudder, which is just putting, the device that steers the ship on the back of the ship, makes the ship more maneuverable. China also invented the compass, which tells people like what direction they're going in. Also during this time period, bills of exchange were created. And a bill of exchange is the idea that like you go into a bank with a bunch of money, you deposit it, and they give you a note that says like this money is worth, like this person has put this much money in our bank. And then you go down the road to another city and you don't have to carry all that money with you. Like metal coin money is like heavy, so you can like it makes it easier and faster for people to engage in trade, right? It's another idea that technology is anytime you're using knowledge and ideas in order to make people's lives better. Another example, the lateen sail came from the Muslim world. It actually originally came from Southeast Asia, but the Muslims perfected it. It's a triangular shaped sail that allows you to sail into the wind. So that's really useful. And the astrolabe was also perfected by Muslim scholars in the Baghdad's House of Wisdom. And that's a navigational tool that allows you to know your line of latitude and allows you to like not get lost at sea. Because if you get lost at sea, then you run out of water and food and you die. So that's, nobody makes a profit on that. So you need to have good navigational tools so that you can actually get where you're going. So now we're going to talk briefly about how trade routes affect culture. And I know that my face is blocking some of this picture, but I think it's going to be okay. As people began trading around different places, you end up with what we call diasporic communities. Diaspora is when people move to new places. So a diasporic community or diasporic community is where you end up with like groups of people who are living somewhere outside of their home country. So like in China, in these like coastal cities that engaged in the Indian Ocean trade, there were like whole neighborhoods of Muslims living in China and like neighborhoods of Jews living in China who had come from other places and had settled in China because they were making a lot of money doing trade. Same thing in Africa. On the coast of Africa, the Swahili city-states were very diverse. They had like all kinds of different people living there, Indian people, Muslim people, African people, and they were all living together in these coastal cities. Another important idea is that trade affects culture by spreading religions. So when I say diffusion of Islam, which is what it says on this screen right here, diffusion is just a fancy word for spread. And Islam originally started in the Middle East, but using the Indian Ocean Trade Network, Islam was able to spread to the Swahili Coast, where it became the dominant religion there. And it also spread to Southeast Asia. And like Indonesia today is the world's most heavily populated Muslim country. And the reason why it's a Muslim country is because of the Indian Ocean Trade Network. Another important way that trade affected culture was a similar idea here, the diffusion of Buddhism or the spread of Buddhism. Buddhism originated in India, but it spread to China and Southeast Asia and later Korea and Japan because of Silk Road trade and because of Indian Ocean trade. So trade spreads religion. And when it does that, it changes religion. So this is the original version of the Buddha. Buddhism is like about, a lot of Buddhism is about like denying yourself like worldly pleasures, like food, like just eating enough food to survive, but not like, not like going out to a fancy dinner and like treating yourself, right? Like the idea is you're supposed to like be meditative and like, give up worldly things in order to try to achieve enlightenment. So the Buddha in India was always portrayed as being really skinny. And that was showing you that he was like not over consuming food. But the thing about that is that most people like to eat food and they like to have a good time. And so that's like not a very appealing quality in a religion. So when Buddhism spread, they developed a new kind of Buddhism called Mahayana Buddhism. And Mahayana Buddhism changed Buddhism in a number of ways, but it tried to make it more like accessible and popular. And so one of the ways they did that was by like having a fat, happy looking Buddha. And so like this is a version of the Buddha that is like a more Chinese version of the Buddha who is like having a good time and like clearly has, can put away some food. So religions spread along trade networks, and they also change when they spread. Like whenever a religion goes to a new place, the people who adapt it there are going to practice it a little bit differently. So that is how trade connected Afro-Eurasia. That's how merchants connected Afro-Eurasia. You need to answer the AIM question as usual in 3 to 4 complete sentences. And thanks for watching. I guess you kind of had to, or you didn't have to. You could always choose not to watch and get a terrible grade in my class, but you made the right choice, and I appreciate you.